Welcome to the first edition of Socrates in the Stockyards. Can I say that? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you. You've been a great audience. Good night. Actually, we have done Socrates in Fort Worth several times before. But the weird thing is that last year, when we did the Socrates in the City event in Houston, it was scheduled on October 12th, which just happens, it happened last year to be my wedding anniversary. Yes. It's a bummer. It's a bummer that on my wedding, I got to work on my wedding anniversary. What's that all about? But this year, and this is really freaky, this has to be God, because we think of the odds, right? But this year, October 12th, which is today, is also our wedding anniversary. It's like when you do the math, that's just crazy. But I do want to say to my lovely wife, happy anniversary, baby. 27 years. They say that the first 27 years are the toughest, because it's been hell, hasn't it? It's been hell. But they say the first 27 years is the toughest. So from here on in, it's like smooth sailing, honey. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be at least in my mind. It's gonna be perfect. Okay, so a couple of things before we begin. First of all, so this is the Fort Worth Club. And we're thrilled to be here back at the Fort Worth Club. I forgot that the Fort Worth Club has an affiliation with Will Rogers. Some of you are old enough to get that reference. Yeah. The American comedian, humorist Will Rogers, right? But he hung out at this club. This was his club. We did an event in Seattle at the Arctic Club, and Sophie Tucker was hanging out at that club. A little different from Will Rogers, but both comedians, both people that I value. And if you don't, I don't care. I just want to mention that. My guest tonight, the reason I wrote my book, Is Atheism Dead? And there are copies of it I think it's the only book we have here of mine and Dr. Collins' book. But the reason I wrote it is because I was in Albuquerque and somebody said to me, have you met Dr. Stephen Collins? He's the archaeologist who discovered biblical Sodom. And I said, wait a minute, are you serious? Like that sounds, you hear a lot of stuff. And I looked into it, and I think it might be true. So we're gonna discuss that tonight. But people make a lot of claims about a lot of stuff. For example, a year and a half ago, we had somebody at Socrates in the City, an elderly gent in his mid-80s, who claimed to my face that he had flown to the moon. Yeah. And that he had walked on its surface and drove a dune buggy around. And I thought, what do you think? I'm like an idiot? Like I'm like a babe in the woods? I'm going to buy your story, sir? I'm no babe in the woods, folks, okay? Have you ever seen a babe in the woods? It will freak you out, because how did it get there, right? But I looked into his story, and it turned out it was true. And you can watch that at our Socrates in the City site, socratescity.com, or at a YouTube channel. But he actually had walked on the moon. The funny thing is, when you interview somebody who's walked on the moon, literally, you're not really interested in his other credentials. You know what I mean? It's like, what's his CV? Where did he go to school? What books has he published? Who cares? He walked on the moon, like that's it. Well, that's basically how I feel about my guest today. Who cares about, all the other stuff that Dr. Stephen Collins has done? He's an archaeologist who, I can tell you without any question, has made one of the greatest discoveries in the history of archaeology. And it's real, it's true. It's not really debatable, frankly. It's not at all debatable. Some people think like whether the earth is flat is debatable. If you're one of those people, don't talk to me later, because I don't have any patience for that stuff. But that's kind of how I feel about the discovery of biblical Sodom. When you look into the details, when you really look into it, you realize there's no question. There's no question. There's always going to be scholars, detractors and stuff, because there are some weird things, right? Like, at some level, at 1900 BC level. They discovered like a GI Joe, and some Rock'em Sock'em robots, and like a lot of people say, I think it might be the 1970s, but we're going to ask him about those discoveries. It is really just an amazing privilege for me to have in this room at this Socrates in the City event, the great Dr. Stephen Collins. Your story is so fascinating, and I don't know where to begin, except I think at the beginning. Let me ask you some really pedestrian questions first. When did you know that you wanted to be an archaeologist?
High school.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know why they offered it, but
they offered it in high school?
Yeah, they offered
Where
it.
did you go to high school?
Sandia High School in Albuquerque. Give them a shout out. They offered an elective in anthropology and archaeology, and I took it, and I went, wow.
Okay, so then you went to college and you studied in college?
Anthropology at the University of New Mexico.
It seems to me that anybody who goes into the field of archaeology would have to have in the back of his mind the dream that he would make some astonishing discovery. Was that in your mind?
No.
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 You're saying I'm wrong?
Yeah. When you go into archaeology, you like archaeology.
Yeah.
You like the process. You like what's happening. You like discovering things, but you really don't know what's in the ground. You don't know what's out there. So you really don't have a particular thing in mind. Now, that might happen along the way.
Yeah.
Which eventually did for me.
Yeah.
But going in, not particularly. You just like the subject, and it's not rocket scientists.
Most archaeologists are very dumb. I've met them. It's really nothing.
I always tell my wife, archaeology is like easier than gardening. I cannot remember the names of all those plants.
Okay, look.
But it's cut and dried, it's simple.
Because I've read your book, and I failed to mention, you and your co-writer wrote a book about the discovery of biblical Sodom, and called Discovering the City of Sodom. Is that the title, right? And it is particularly well written, I have to say. I don't say that about a lot of books, but it's not just an amazing story, but it's well written. But in getting to know you, I realized that you really are, I hate to embarrass people. Actually, I love to embarrass people, but you really are brilliant. You're not just some guy that, digs around and finds stuff. You really are an extraordinary scholar. And I know that. But the story of how you came to do this excavation, I want you to tell that story. So we'll go back to, what was it, 1996?
That's right.
When in 1996 was it?
I was leading a study tour. I had Sodom and Gomorrah on the itinerary, because there was a site toward the south end of the Dead Sea over on the Jordan side of the Rift Valley that many scholars, including myself, generally accepted as the site of Sodom. A little site called Babadra and an associate site called Numera. That was Sodom and Gomorrah for a lot of people, and I didn't have a problem with that. In fact, in I think 1993, I was in a documentary that aired on CBS, I think, and touting Babadra as part of the team, touting Babadra as Sodom.
Spreading the lies.
Yes.
You mentioned in your book that it was because of the work of a very eminent biblical archaeologist named Albright that it was pretty much established, like, this is biblical Sodom on the southern part of the...
There was actually a shift. Back in the 19th century, virtually every single explorer scholar who went to that area, and many of them were Christians, and they had a Bible, and in their spare time, and they were British surveyors, and a lot of time military surveyors, and they're getting the lay of the land. And but many of them in their spare time went around on horseback with a Bible over their saddle horn, looking for biblical places, following the text. And virtually all of them, except for one, But almost all of them, the famous ones, and Thompson and Conder and Wilson and so many others, they put Sodom at the northeast of the Dead Sea.
In the 19th century?
In the 19th century.
The northeast part of the Dead Sea.
Right.
Okay.
That's where they put it. But
why? And they put
shifted.
it there. Why?
Because they follow the text. Genesis 13 is the verbal map. It's very detailed. It will take you to the site of Sodom. It's what I call a primary text. It is specifically written consciously by the author to take the reader to the site of Sodom.
Okay, so in the 19th century, they didn't know where it was, but they thought it's around here someplace, or it would have been around here if it's discoverable. What happened in the 20th century?
Well, the shift was that one of those guys, just one that I can find, Edward Robinson, who was another 19th century explorer scholar, went to the Holy Land for a few months and went to the south end of the Dead Sea. Wasn't particularly a Bible scholar, but went to the south end of the Dead Sea and decided it looked like a place God would have destroyed. So he spun his own little etiological legend from the look of the place, and for some odd reason,
because it looked like a place God would destroy.
Albright looked at Robinson's work and picked up on it and touted it as probably right. But yet Albright never, ever in any of his writings does any textual analysis on Genesis 13, 1 through 12. Never touches the geography.
Which is weird because Albright was a pretty respectable guy.
Brilliant, genius, actually.
Yeah.
And so when Albright did that, he knew that every site, like Babadra and Numira and all the sites in the southern part of the Dead Sea, he knew that all of those belonged to what's called the early Bronze Age and were all out of business by 2400 BC at least, which everybody knew was hundreds and hundreds of years before any possible time of Abraham.
So 700 years too early.
Too early for Abraham.
But he just kind of...
Well, he said, here's what he said. Maybe, and it's science is never good when you start with a maybe and end with a maybe, right? Maybe when the event occurred, there was an earthquake and the cities were actually just directly south of the Dead Sea, sitting on the rift, sitting on the fault zone, and somehow possibly an earthquake happened and the ground sank and the Dead Sea water flowed in over them and covered that what became the shallow southern basin of the Dead Sea. Well, everybody took his protege, G.E. Wright, picked up on that. He spread that rumor, and everybody spread that rumor. And the problem for Albright, but he's long gone by now, but 20 years ago, the Dead Sea levels began to drop. And now today, there's no water in the shallow southern basin other than what they pump in there in the evaporative pans to get the minerals. But archaeologists went down there and looked around. There's no pottery. There's nothing. Nothing there. In fact, it's kind of a crazy idea that Albright had. Had he looked at the topography, he would have realized that it's a terrible place to build a town or even put a village because every time it rains, the area fills up with water. It's a sump. It is the lowest spot on the face of the earth, after all. Literally. And so, not a good place. Nobody ever lived there. Every archaeologist now, 100%, knows that nobody ever lived in that area at the very, very south end of the Dead Sea.
So we know that today.
We know that today, but he didn't know it then.
But in 1924, when Albright makes this announcement or whatever, nobody knew this, and it was just a nice idea. And people, I'm really fascinated. It's one of the themes of my book is Atheism Dead, how information travels or how bad ideas, you get stuck on a bad idea and people are stuck on it for 100 years or whatever. That's kind of what happened here, isn't it?
Yes, and it wasn't that everybody went that way. It's that Albright had so much, let me give you an example. There's a famous 5-volume Bible encyclopedia, okay, published by Zondervan. You probably know that publisher. If you look up the article on Sodom, the writer is making a beautiful case. He's going through Genesis 13. He's making a beautiful case for a northern Sodom. And I'm going, yes, right, yes, perfect. And then he says, but I'm not an archaeologist. And W.F. Albright is the greatest archaeologist, and he put Sodom at the south end of the Dead Sea, so I suppose I have to defer to him. And I'm going, no, you don't. And so, by the way, if you go to Zoar, which is a related town, just over, to the Z volume of that encyclopedia, and you look up Zoar, that writer makes a beautiful case for northern Sodom and sticks to his guns.
Okay, but we have to go back in time. So in the 20th century, most people accepted Albright's conclusion that if Sodom existed, it's on the southern part of the Dead Sea. So even you in 1993 kind of bought that, but then in 1996, you go over there, and what happens?
Well, we were, I think, spending the night in Beersheba in Israel before we were going down, cross over it a lot, to Aqaba. And so we're there. So I know the next day we're going to head over to this traditional site. And so I thought, okay, I'm just going to brush up on the story. So I get the Bible out and I read through the story. This was my very first moment, the aha moment, more or less. But anyway, I read the text to brush up on the story. I read through it. And I was very tired.
To Genesis 13.
Genesis 13.
It's night.
In fact, I read Genesis 13 through 19. And I got to the end of it, and I thought, I was tired. We'd been touring all day. I must be sleep reading. You ever sleep read where you're reading and all of a sudden you realize the last 3 paragraphs, you have no idea what it said? So I said, okay. So I sort of woke myself up, sat up real tall, and read through it 3 more times. I read through that text 4 times, and when I got to the end of it, I closed the Bible and I said to myself, not only is there nothing in this text that would locate Sodom toward the south of the Dead Sea, everything clearly locates it north and east of the Dead Sea. And I couldn't get past it. But we were now just starting to excavate up in the West Bank at a site called Khirbet El Makhatir, and we had just started. I didn't need a project. Didn't need to do this. But I thought someday, if life sort of settles down and gets boring, I'm going to come back to this point because this is really bugging me. Why did I think it was toward the south? Why did everybody think it's toward the south? I want to know where it was. Now, I always tell people, I don't care if it's north, south, east, west, in Central Park. I don't care where it is. It doesn't matter to me. I have no dog in this fight. Why would I care? It's just that all of a sudden the text and what people thought weren't dancing. It wasn't happening for me.
And you knew that Genesis is reliable, and so you're going to, if you're going to dig, you're going to dig where Genesis says it is.
I mean, the Bible is the only place that really mentions Sodom. Yeah. So you have to go with the text. Yeah. Well, what does the text actually say? There's a lot of information embedded in that text that gives you geographical clues. It's very, very clear. So I took by the way, that night I reached over, got my itinerary, Sodom and Gomorrah. I put big question marks over the top of it. And I had to fess up to the folks as I got them onto the site and was lecturing that
the next day.
Yesterday, early in the day yesterday, I would have said this was Sodom. Today, I'm not sure at all because the text doesn't seem to go. It's a nice site, look around, have fun, but I'm really thinking it's not here anymore.
Right. Wow.
No refunds. Yeah.
Sorry. So, all right. So you have this moment in 1996, but you're busy. You're a busy archaeologist. When do you get to begin to test this theory? What year did you think maybe I can look into this?
Well, we were excavating at Khirbet El Makhatir up until 2000. So we had a summer of 2000. We had a season there, and the Intifada, by the end of the season, we were listening to the Israeli gunships shooting at Ramallah, just a couple of hills away. And so the Intifada was heating up, and that really killed the project for the next several years.
Yeah.
So we were done.
Yeah.
So that winter, So here's an archaeologist, and I've been digging at Bethsaida, I've been digging at Kersey, I've been digging here and there, and now at Makadar, and now I got nothing. What are we going to do? We need an excavation project. What's happening? And then I thought, the Sodom issue. I need to write a paper. I need to write up my research on this, so I put in, it was just the right time of year, so I put in to present a paper at the Near East Archaeological Society the next November. And I knew if I didn't do that, I could be pushed off. I'd find something else to do, or I'd get busy, forget about it. No, I said, I'm going to do this. It's bothering me. I want to do it. So I did it. And I presented that paper. And afterwards, I remember, after I got through, I remember Edwin Yamauchi, professor at University of Miami, Ohio, notable scholar, especially on Persia. Everybody else just kind of shuffling around, and I noticed that Dr. Yamauchi was making his way through the crowd like a salmon going upstream, and he's making his way to me, and I think he's going to hit me. He's going to clobber me. He's going to hit me with something out of left field. And he came up to me and he said, "You're exactly right." And so at that moment I thought, maybe I'm not totally crazy. And there's at least one other scholar who thinks this is reasonable. And it went on from there.
So when did you act on this?
Okay, you can do all the research you want, but eventually you got to get on the ground. So I presented the paper in 2021 in November, but
2001.
2001.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we had our season in 2020.
No, you mean 2000.
Yes, sorry. 2000.
This is over 20 years
yes,
ago.
I know.
Just to be clear.
2000,
yeah.
You're right.
Right.
So 2000, and then 2021, I presented a paper in November.
2001.
But before 2001.
Right. 22 years ago.
Yes.
22 years ago.
Yes. And but we went to Jordan first.
Right.
I mean, I had already basically written the paper. But Danette and I and a couple of our friends headed to Jordan because we needed to get on the ground. We had to get on the ground.
Now, part of the reason, you say this obviously in your book, that the consensus had gotten stuck on where it was because of the hostility, the tension between Jordan and Israel from the 60s into the 90s. Americans were not going over into Jordan to do a lot of archaeology. So that had changed by the time 2001.
Yeah, our site this huge archaeological site had never been excavated.
Ever. Well,
K. Prague did a small trench on the far end of it, way on the west in 1989-90. And she lost a local worker, lost a foot to a landmine. And so they stopped. Well, we come to find out that the whole western half of the tell was landmined during the from 67 to 70. And that's why archaeologists weren't going there.
Okay, so nobody had been doing archaeology in that area, but this is the area that you're thinking the text says if Sodom and Gomorrah can be found, they're in this neck of the woods. So you go there with Danette in 2002, is it? In 2001.
Summer.
In the summer, and what do you do? What do you do at that point?
Well, the first thing you do, as a scholar, the first thing you do is you go to the library. There's a wonderful archaeological library at Acor.
In Jordan.
In Jordan,
yeah.
The archaeological center there. And so we just start pulling books, pulling survey reports, because what was interesting is that on all the maps that I could get from American sources, Israeli sources, European sources, that side of the Jordan River, northeast of the Dead Sea, was blank. There wasn't anything there. And I'm going, but the Bible tells me there's got to be something there. But when we took off from the U.S. to head to Jordan, I had nothing. I had the biblical text that said this is where it's supposed to be. It should be right here. I have maps, archaeological maps, that are blank. I'm going, okay, this is not boding very well. Well, we get to Acre, start looking at Jordanian surveys, multiple ones, people that have excavated in the region, at other sites, smaller sites in the area. What did we find? 14 major archaeological sites. Well, we needed 5, right? Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, the Zeboim, the 5 cities of the plain. When we left the U.S., we had nothing. When we got through with our work at Acre, we had 14. Well, now we had the opposite problem. We had too many. What do? You have to go down and check every single one of them out. We had surface survey reports, what pottery they were finding from what periods, and so we just had to go to every single one. And so over the next few days, that's what we did. We went to every single site. But there was one little book that I came across, and I hope Rami is still around and will hear this. Rami Khoury, writing at that time for the Lebanon Beirut Star. He wrote a little book called Archaeological Sites of the Jordan Valley. And so Travis Jones, who was with us on that trip, he brought that from the Acre Library. I'm sitting at the desk looking through stuff. He said, here, look at this. Flop that down. I'm going, whoa. So I'm picking through it, and I find what he says about all these sites. And then I turn to Tal el-Hammam. And in his entry for Tal el-Hammam, he starts like this. Tal el-Hammam is the largest archaeological ruin in the Jordan Valley. And I'm going, okay. That's the big one. Well, let's look at that one last. Let's save that one for last. Let's go find all the others. And I've seen and had seen by every site in Israel. I know how big the sites are, how they feel. And so we saw all the others. They were pretty typical. And then we pulled up to Tal el-Hammam, and looking at it, I almost didn't realize what it was. It was so big that it almost looked like part of the natural landscape. And once I realized that beautiful 36-degree slope going around what we eventually knew as the upper city was due to the rampart building of the Middle Bronze Age folks who built these sloping ramparts. And so I looked at that and went, wow, that is a big site. And so we walked up to the top of it. We saved it for last, best for last, walked up to the top. And I stood where eventually I knew that Conder, two of these 19th century scholars, Conder and William Thompson, had stood on the top. And Thompson wrote this. He says, the Bible has taken us to this location. Which of these sites is Sodom? We don't know, but it must be one of these. Where was he camping? On the top of Tal el-Hammam. And so everybody else went down to the side. And I had the feeling right there, it was more than a gut feeling. I mean, the things were sort of ching, 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 kind of cranking and working. It's like logically, just on the sheer logic of it, if this is the biggest site, and in my paper I had presented that the Bible says clearly that Sodom was the largest Bronze Age city north and east of the Dead Sea. And if we were now standing on the largest Bronze Age city northeast of the Dead Sea, it was kind of a no-brainer. Now, you have to excavate to see if it's actually there in the time of Abraham, but everything looked like that. It looked like that was the way it was. So I was pretty confident. And so I haven't told this to too many people. I think it might be in the book, not sure. But I let Danette and Travis and Charity walk down to the van. And I stayed on the top and walked down by myself. And it was strategic in antiquity. It's strategic in the modern world because the Jordanian military had built trenches and gun placements and things all around the top. But I was walking down that ingress-egress road that the military had bulldozed in over the top of the site. And I stopped about halfway down what eventually became our field UC, upper C, And and this is crazy, but I had to do it. I knelt down, picked up a handful of dirt, and I just let it go through my fingers. And I said to the tell, I said, someday you're going to tell me what you know. And guess what I did? We just finished our 16th and final excavation season a few months ago. And I waited till everybody got off this. I had to close this, right? Waited till everybody got off the site. I walked down by myself, and I stopped. And I picked up a little more dirt, and I said this. I said, you didn't tell me everything, but you told me enough.
Right. It's, it's amazing, because if I had interviewed you 5 years ago, it would have been roughly the same story, because your book came out. What year did your book come out?
2013.
2013. But it is amazing that you are now officially done, that you have done this 16 years.
Where the easy part is done.
Yeah.
The fun and the easy part
Right.
is done. Now, it's not that excavation is easy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pains. There's a
Right.
lot of dealing with governments and agencies. But that part's finished. Now the hard part starts. The hard part and the expensive part of this whole thing is the analysis, the final publication,
Right.
in getting other scholars involved to do cross studies and all of that.
Okay, but
So-
I want to go back, because you've done plenty. It's like so amazing to me. So you start actually excavating this unexcavated site, which is amazing that you're talking about this gigantic city that was there for thousands of years. Nobody ever excavated it. So you start in 2002, you start?
2005.
2005.
It took 5 years of meeting at least twice a year with the Director General of the Department of Antiquities to convince him to give us that permit
In Jordan.
in Jordan.
But you got it.
We finally got it.
Okay, so in 2005, you start. What year do you hit pay dirt, literally and figuratively?
Well,
It's about 3 years in.
you don't go in, even though you have ideas in the back of your head, even biblical ideas in the back of your head, you don't just blow through stuff looking for.
You're not
What you
Heinrich
think?
Schliemann.
Archaeology is you have to take everything seriously from the top, everything in the Iron Age, Roman period, the Iron Age, going all the way down layer by layer. You have to document everything, because archaeology technically is a destructive process. You're destroying the very thing you're studying, and you can't put it back. So if you can't reproduce everything in 3 dimensions with measurements and photographs and all that, then it's lost. So everything has to be done. That's why it took 16 seasons, 16 years and we still have 8 or 9 or maybe 10 years left of processing and publishing all of this stuff.
But the year, the sort of the inciting incident in the story, so to speak, is when you decide to do that. What do you call it? A test shaft, or?
Yeah, I wanted to know what the stratigraphy looked like, if we could possibly, what are we looking at layer-wise? Yeah. And of course, we tell the historical horizon that we're working in by the pottery.
Yeah.
The cultural or historical layer that we're dealing with is in the pottery. So as we do, and that's what I do. That's one of my.
You're a ceramic
things.
typologist.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Right.
So. The upper city has a swale, right? It has kind of 2 high points at the end, and it has a low spot right in the middle. So I thought, okay, let's put at least one quick probe, sondage, 2 by 2 meter, straight down, just to see what's in this place. We're already as low as we can get to start. Let's see what's below.
So you have so Sodom, according to the biblical text, you would assume was destroyed around 1700 BC-ish?
Well, we thought it had to be, if it's associated with Abraham, which obviously that's the story, it has to be post-1800 for a whole litany of reasons.
Right.
One of which, it's not unimportant, one of which is that all the cities and towns mentioned in the Abrahamic narratives, Hebron, Jerusalem, Dan, Shechem, Damascus, All of those cities were abandoned and unoccupied entirely from about 2500 BC down to about 1800 BC. There was nobody at Jerusalem between 2500 and 1800 BC. And all archaeologists know this. So you got to have, in the story, you got to have Melchizedek, you got to have the king of Salem, the king of Jerusalem. So to get Melchizedek, a city, you have to go post 1800. It just makes sense.
Okay, so as you're doing your layer by layer excavation, at some point you decide to kind of speed things up and do this test shaft. You said 2 meters by 2 meters.
Yep.
And so suddenly you're going faster now.
We went through about, I think as I recall, about 2.5 meters of Iron Age. And we now know after all these years that we have 4 basic Iron Age strata. And but when we got down, as soon as we got down under the Iron Age, we got into this very ashy matrix.
So what year roughly, we're talking around 1700 BC level?
Yeah.
So this is about the level.
The latter part of the Middle Bronze II period.
Okay, so now you're in the time when this destruction might have happened,
right.
And you actually discover ash.
Yeah, we get down underneath the Iron Age, and all of a sudden the Iron Age stops, the pottery shifts to the Middle Bronze Age. That's a 700-year jump. So we went from 1,000, the Iron Age starts up here about 9th century, goes down to about 1,000 BC, and then we jump from 1,000 BC down to back to about 1,700 BC.
So
There's
700 years
There's an
of no
occupational
civilization
gap.
on this spot.
Nothing there.
Which is insane and strange.
Right,
Because this is prime real estate. Why are there 7 centuries with nobody living here?
Right.
Okay, so at the 1700 BC level, you find the soot and ash. Describe that. And the moment that you're, was it a graduate student that?
Yes.
Tell the story. You come to this ash. How deep is the ash?
Well, we don't know yet, and we never did find out because, well, I'll tell you what happened in a minute. But we get down into this stuff, and it's we now know it as the MB2TDM, the Middle Bronze Age II terminal destruction matrix. Okay, it's the what's left over from the destruction of the city. And we didn't know how deep it was. We now know it to be across the upper tail about a meter to a meter and a half deep. It's really
again, to be clear, it's
ugly.
about 1700 BC. You're digging down, you get to this level, and it's ash. And you can smell this.
Ash and other stuff.
And so you understand that something is odd. This is not normal suddenly to find a layer of ash.
Yeah, to just jump from the Iron Age back onto ashy material, you would expect to find maybe some other things, maybe some decomposed mud brick, because these cities are built of mud bricks. And they're sun-dried, so they would just melt in the rain. And so you would think, well, if there's 700 years here and the city just became abandoned for some reason, all of this mud brick stuff should melt, and we should have mud brick detritus, fairly deep. We didn't hit any of that. We hit into this destruction matrix, what we eventually knew as the destruction matrix. But it's full of pieces of pottery, it's full of chunks of ash and carbonized wood and pieces of everything you can imagine, of buildings and bones.
So suddenly you find that I love these terms. You call this the destruction matrix. You find this bizarre, I mean, let's be honest, this is a bizarre phenomenon. You're digging down and, your city, civilization, then suddenly ash. And when you describe it, you say, what do they call it, the Cuisinart effect?
That's what we I didn't name it that. One of our field supervisors said, this is like the quiz. It's like somebody took the city, threw it into a blender, and hit the button. and just ground everything up. And here it is, all strewn together.
Which is completely anomalous.
Yeah.
This has never been seen.
It's weird. I mean, I dug through destruction layers before, but this was a little bit on the weird side.
A little bit on the weird side?
Yeah, it's a little odd.
Okay.
But at the time, we didn't know anything about it. This was our first experience with it. It's destruction stuff, and we knew that.
Okay.
And we weren't going to find out much. Well, I'll tell you what happened. About 3 or 4 days later, a rain happened. And remember, this is in the swale. It's in the low part. That trench filled up with water. And we couldn't go any deeper. But we got what we got from that. But once we got down into it just a little bit, Carol Cobes, where's Carol? Is Carol on?
Is Carol in the room?
Carol's in the room. They're here somewhere.
Carol, where?
Where's Carol?
There's Carol. That's the woman.
She's down
Carol,
at the...
I mentioned you in my book, Is Atheism Dead? I'd like you to have a copy. It's great. It's great to know that you're here because, okay, describe this moment that Carol is down there.
She's down there. I mean, it's like 3 meters almost. So she's down there. And she says to me, "This is weird. You need to see this." And okay, so I got down in there and I looked at this thing. And it's a piece of pottery, but it looked like glazed pottery. It has kind of a greenish...
Okay, when was glazed pottery invented? 700 AD?
AD.
AD.
Yeah.
So you got a problem.
Yeah, Islamic pottery.
It's like finding a G.I. Joe or a Rock'em Sock'em Robot.
Yeah, it's
the game over.
It's like...
Game over. You found glazed pottery. It's 1700 BC.
Yeah.
Glazed pottery is not invented until 700
yeah.
AD. So you now realize, I think we have a problem.
I'm thinking contamination. How does this get here? What is a piece of... Well, I can't say exactly what I said.
Right.
What is a piece of Islamic pottery
we edit all that
doing
out.
3 meters down in this trench? And then we picked it up and looked at it. Oh, it's Middle Bronze Age pottery. It's wheeled.
Okay, hang on. You're an expert. You're a ceramic typologist. You look at this thing, and you know in an instant, this is a pithoi jar from, describe that, because you see it, you know exactly what you're looking at. This is 1700 BC. This is the neck of a pithoi
That's from the shoulder
jar.
up, going on to the neck, just starting the curve up to the neck.
And you know it is from 1700 BC.
Yeah, it's
right.
consistent with the pottery that's in there with it.
It's glazed.
Well, it's definitely got glass on it. And so we're looking at it going, that's just really strange. And so Gene Hall was there, who a volunteer that year, and he was part of the Manhattan Project. And was there at the Trinity site when they blew up the first atomic bomb. And he knew this stuff.
You live in New Mexico.
Yeah.
Okay. So you are there in Jordan with your team, including the man you're describing, who was there, not just involved in the Manhattan Project in the 40s, but was there in New Mexico at this, what you're describing, the Trinity site. Oppenheimer calls it Trinity, where they were doing the atomic bomb explosions. So this guy was actually there.
Right.
This is coincidence. This is insane to me. That's amazing. And
so he's there.
He sees this.
So I toss it up to him, and he's the one that caught it coming up out of the trench. And he looked at it.
It sounds like you're making it up. I know you're not.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
He looks at it and he says, "This looks like Trinitite." I had never heard that word before in my life. I said, "What's that?" He said, "You know, don't you hate it when people say that? If I knew, I wouldn't be asking. You know, it's the melted sand under the tower when they exploded the first atomic bomb. It just melted stuff." He said, "This looks like that material."
I mean, the idea that you would have someone with you there who is from New Mexico, who actually knows...
He's actually from Bellingham, Washington, but he had been on the Manhattan Project. Want you to be accurate.
The fact that you toss this thing up and he says, looks like Trinitite, like, that's insane. That's just amazing.
It was an interesting moment.
Because I don't know. So, just to be clear, when the atomic bombs were detonated in the New Mexico desert, what kind of temperature are we talking about to melt sand into glass?
The typical temperature underneath that tower is somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000, 30,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
So like Houston?
It's hot. And actually a lot hotter because it dissipates pretty quickly. But nuclear explosions, atomic explosions, create very intense heat.
Okay, so at that moment, your friend says, looks like Trinitite, because obviously you're saying to yourself, this is 1700 BC, this is, hundreds and hundreds of years, 2,000 years before glazing was invented. So does it occur to you then that this glaze is the result of an insane level of heat?
Yeah, I mean, before I tossed it up, actually just kind of looking at it, I noticed that the melted surface glass, and eventually we find out it is the clay body, the fabric itself that's melted. And but the glass was lapping over the edge of the break by about 1 millimeter. Now that was strange, because here it's flowing and it stops as it just goes 1 millimeter over the edge.
What does that make you think? I don't understand.
It's not glaze, it's not applied to the pottery, it's the melted pottery itself. So the story gets more intense. So anyway, I say to him, after he tells me that, this looks like Trinitite, I don't know what that is. He said, it's this. So, well, put the registration number on it. We'll have to have that analyzed back in the U.S., which we did. We got back to the U.S., we carved it up. Well, actually, we didn't. We took it down to New Mexico Tech, a major doctoral university, and Dr. David Burley, a materials scientist and professor there, took it, sliced it up, prepared it for the scanning electron microscope. Actually, it was one up on that. It was actually a Kamika 100, and which is like super glorified electron microscope. And we took it in and had the USGS scientist running the machine. And this, right above us in the Museum of Geology, and I didn't know it then, but we went afterwards, we went up there and looked. Right above us is a big display case full of Trinitite. I didn't know that then, but I give it to this lady who happens to be an expert on that. And she gets the little samples that Dr. Burley had taken and polished.
You don't tell this woman that this is from 1700 BC.
No, she knows
You just
nothing.
give her something to analyze.
Right, she knows nothing. And so she's loading in these samples into the machine, because what they're going to do, he's coated it with carbonate, I think they coat it with carbon atoms, and then they shoot these laser beams through it or whatever. And it tells you exactly what's there. It tells you chemical composition of everything there. And anyway, so I hand her the piece that it's cut from. She looks at it, first word out of her mouth, nice piece of Trinitite. Where did you get it? I said, turn it over. It's pottery. Where did this come from? I said, never mind, just do the test. Now, I was kind of kidding her, because right there on the lab sheet is sample Tal El Hammam Excavation Project Jordan and all that. But But that's the first thing. That's the second person who knew this material, who's seen it, and their instant reaction was, it looks like Trinitite. And so she does the test. And so here's this screen, like this. And so she's zeroing in, looking at stuff. She says, look at this. This looks like a plagioclase. This is melt glass. And see, there's no structure to it. It's just all kind of homogeneous. And so that's the melt glass. That's about a couple of millimeters. Let's go underneath it. And she says, so she zeroes in and she blows this thing up. It looks like a basketball on the screen, like that. Boom. I said, what's that? No, I'm sorry, it was worse than that. She said, do you know what that is? Why do people ask me? No, I don't. I don't know what that is. She says, that's a zircon crystal.
Okay, so inside this piece of pottery.
Just below the melt.
Because you're talking about there's this melt, but then in the pottery that's not melted,
right? It's not,
within that,
right below the glass part.
There is a globule of what looks like melted pottery.
Well, it's a crystal. Like zircon is very much like a quartz crystal. All right, little tiny sand grain, and she puts it up there, and here it is. She says, "Do you know what that is?" No, it's a zircon. I said, "How do you know it's a zircon?" Because my machine tells me it's a zircon. I'm shooting a beam through it. It's telling me it's a zircon. Okay, it's a zircon. Do you know why it looks like that? I don't like it when people do this to me. No, I don't.
You should say yes, but go ahead.
She says, look at it. It's perfectly circular. It lost its angularity. What? Why? She said, because it melted. This is a melted zircon. And so we're looking at that going, okay, it's a melted zircon. I said, what temperature does it take to do that? Remember, it's not on the surface. It's about an 1/8 inch or more below the melt glass on the surface. I said, what temperature does it take to do that? And if I recall my numbers right, about 2,800 degrees Celsius. Okay? And she said, but look at this one. And she goes over to another one of those. This is a glob. And she said, that's a zircon as well. But look at these other little, so she shows me there's little bubbles inside this zircon. I said, well, what's that? She said, this one boiled. Not only did it melt, it boiled. I said, well, what does it take to do that? She said about 3,900 degrees Celsius, about 5,000
okay,
degrees
we're in
Fahrenheit.
America, so what's that Fahrenheit?
5,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
5,000 degrees.
Now, that's the temperature of the surface of the sun, by the way. Magma, volcanic magma, when it's flowing, somewhere between 1,800 and 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit.
Magma is half as hot.
In other words, what she's telling me is that these temperatures cannot be attained terrestrially, geologically. They are not possible. Now, so logically I'm thinking, now wait a minute, if this thing is not on the surface, it's not in the melt glass, it's below the melt glass, it's a boiled zircon crystal at 5,000 degrees, 1/8 of an inch at least from the surface of this thing. I said, well, if it's that hot inside, how hot is it at the surface? She said, well, I don't know, except to tell you this. It has to be an extremely high temperature. I said, give me a figure. She said, 15, 20, 30,000 degrees centigrade for a millisecond.
For a millisecond.
For just that long. I said, why that long? She said, because if that level of temperature is sustained for even a full second, the whole thing is melted into a glob or vaporized.
I know this story well, and yet you're freaking me out. This is so amazing. Okay, so in the history of the world, human beings have not been able to create temperatures like this.
No, you can't.
The only time you have a temperature like this is, on the surface of the sun, or
You can't do it.
If you have an atomic bomb, which obviously, so
You can't do it in a kiln. You can't do it in smelting metal. These temperatures cannot be reached in the ancient world for sure.
yeah, or in the modern world until recently. So at this point, you're onto something here.
Yeah, but I didn't ask for this. This is not my fault. I am just an archaeologist. It's just what we found. And so over the years, we started finding bits and pieces of this melt stuff at various places across the site.
Okay,
Not buckets and buckets of it,
Yeah,
but some.
yeah.
But let me tell you this. On our site grid, the site is so large that we have more than 13,000 6 by 6 meter, that's 18 feet by 18 foot squares, grid squares, surveyed squares on our site. Over 13,000 of those grid squares on our site. First grid square that penetrated into the Middle Bronze Age found that. That's like finding a hundredth of a needle in a haystack. What that tells me statistically is that the stuff is not rare, and that the fact that it even shows up, because the whole thing was ground up into powder, with the kind of event we now know it is, most things are pulverized completely, if not vaporized. And so the only thing that gets left in this destruction matrix is what lands after the event is over.
When you talk about this destruction matrix, you talk about, so obviously you've discovered something where the temperature is so hot that it's completely mind-blowing. In other words, at this point, this is nothing normal. So what conceivably could have caused this?
Okay, that's a great question, but I have to add a little bit to it, just a tiny bit. That's one thing. High temperature proxies or indicators.
Yeah.
There are 25 more. Over the last 6 years, when this part of our project was taken over by a completely independent team of researchers called the Comet Research Group. These are not people of faith, most of them. A few of them are, but most of them are not.
Is this what ended up being the Nature magazine article?
Yes, they are
So about two years ago or so,
Yeah.
Nature magazine, one of the premier peer-reviewed journals in the world,
published this.
published about this.
Yeah, and they studied it for about 6 years, and they came up with it. By the way, they're about ready to publish a follow-on, but it wasn't just that. It was shocked quartz. They had shocked quartz that showed that the pressure to create this, to shock a piece of quartz, and I can't technically go into it, but I asked Alan, one of the lead researchers, I said, give me a PSI. I know what my car says, 33 PSI on my car tires. Give me a PSI. 750,000 PSI.
Gesundheit.
So
Say
pressure.
that again. I mean, that's a level of pressure. Again, what in the world are we supposed to compare that to? Like, what in the world? You don't. I don't.
Not in this world. So what else? Iridium. Anybody ever study asteroid impacts? What's one of the key signatures of an asteroid impact?
These are
Iridium.
mostly oil and cattle people here.
Yeah.
But
Let me give you another one. Osmium. Osmium is not found. It's not just a rare earth element. It's a not earth element. It's not even found on this planet. Osmium is another. It's a smoking gun. We have iridium, osmium, high platinum, high iron, high. Just go off the list of things that aren't supposed to be in a garden variety destruction layer, and it's not above and it's not below. It's just in that layer. 26 proxies that only can be produced by one phenomenon.
Now, before you say what the phenomenon is, the other thing, again, as a layperson who doesn't discuss iridium, you talk about a city like this, and you talk about the walls of the city, and what you say in the book, and I probably say in my book, is that gigantic walls of what, 12-foot thick brick walls.
Yeah, the city walls, 5 to 6 meters thick.
Were somehow like wet tissue paper, gone. So what does it take? What kind of force would it take for a 12-foot thick wall to be instantly wiped out?
Yeah.
What are we talking about? What could do that?
Well, you could do it with less than 750,000 PSI. Yeah, I mean, and the upper city, the lower city, we have almost no mud brick on the Middle Bronze Age walls. On the upper city, we have anywhere from 10 to 12 to 15 courses of mud brick. But these are buildings that have meter thick or 2 meters plus thick walls, and they're all sheared off kind of at the same level. What's interesting about that is you would think, okay, if the city was abandoned and all this stuff melted and it just disappeared normally, where would this stuff go? It would go down the slope, down the hill, down to a lower, it would pool in a lower area. Remember that little area that we excavated, that very first probe in the swale in the low part, right below the palace where you probably have a 4 or 5 story building? That's where it would go. Do you remember what I said? We got under the Iron Age and we hit the destruction matrix and there's no melted, decomposed mud brick detritus. If that city melted away, where'd all the mud brick detritus go?
Okay, so to cut to the chase, we have to go to Tunguska, Siberia. What do the scientists in Nature who publish this and others, whatever, when they say, well, we've got to explain this, their explanation, what do they call it? An airburst?
A meteoritic airburst event.
A meteoritic airburst event?
Or it's also called a bolide event.
Okay, which is what?
When a large space fragment comes into the atmosphere.
An asteroid, a meteor.
Could be an asteroid fragment, could be a meteor of some kind, a stony asteroid.
But not that large,
metallic.
like what, 200 feet diameter?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be football stadium size.
A lot smaller than this room.
I mean, but these are the kinds of things, these are extinction level events, many of them. And they've happened all over, throughout Earth's history. Not that frequently, thankfully. We haven't experienced one in our lifetime.
65 million years ago, this happened
dinosaurs.
And wiped out the dinosaurs.
About 10,000 years ago, wiped out the megafauna of the great, the woolly mammoths and the saber-toothed tigers, and all of that happened in North America. Another impact event.
One of these happened in 1908.
Tunguska, Siberia.
Tunguska, Siberia. Very remote location. But talk about that, because that's where that's what people say, like what happened then, that's what had to have happened.
So this happened then. And this is all a function of mass. How big is it? How heavy is it? Trajectory. Is it coming in straight through the atmosphere? Is it coming in shallow? And velocity. So you have an object coming in at tens of thousands of miles an hour that's big enough and coming in at a shallow enough angle where it comes through a lot of atmosphere and it's heating. And at a point, it goes, within a second, it goes from, because it's going to go from the top of the atmosphere to the surface in less than 2 seconds. That's how fast it's going.
It's like, what, 35,000 miles an hour?
Yeah, or plus. If it's an asteroid fragment, it could be going like 80,000 miles.
So it's about like 200 feet in diameter.
Yeah, it's big.
And it's moving at that speed.
At that speed. And at a point, the heat gets so great that in just a second, it moves from solid to liquid to gas to plasma. And when that happens, it explodes. Not only is there the shock wave of the object itself moving through the atmosphere, but the when the explosion occurs, there's a secondary shockwave front that pushes out in front of it. And we think this thing, the end result of all of that research, and it's still ongoing, is that this thing came in at a shallow angle from the southwest. It blew up as it just got into maybe 1 kilometer or so above the north end of the Dead Sea, exploded and completely wiped out everything in that area. This is, and of course in the paper they superimposed the Tunguska destruction over the top of our site to show the similarity of the amount of destruction.
Tunguska is 1908, happens in Siberia.
Let me describe that. 2,500 square kilometers of trees burned and splayed out.
Okay, just because I happen to know it and I think it's interesting. So in an instant in 1908, because of a 200-foot diameter something coming into the atmosphere, exploding at that heat, 80 million trees are instantly flattened. So this is like an inconceivable event. And all the scientists who studied this site said that's the only explanation for what could have caused this.
Yes.
And
people are welcome to have at it with all kinds of other explanations, but we're pretty confident, or
we know what happened.
They're
There's
pretty
only one
confident that
question.
you're not going to come up with something that can account for all of these indicators.
Well, what's so fascinating to me is that even in the article, in the Nature article, all of these secular scientists say we have to mention Sodom and Gomorrah.
I told them not to do it.
I mean, can you imagine the Christian guy telling the secular scientists, don't mention Sodom and Gomorrah?
Yeah, these guys are they're scientists. And they tell me all the time, Malcolm LeCompte and others, they just tell me, I'm not a Bible person, I'm only in this because NASA's going to ask me what happens when one of these things happens, and we want to know what to tell them if this thing happens over LA or New York. There won't be one. And so they want to know the data. And so they tell me that. But they were going to publish this thing, and they knew what I thought, and they knew what the Bible said, and so they said, well, we want to mention that we're going to ask the question, could this possibly have been the event in the Bronze Age that gave rise to the Sodom lore that eventually found its way into the Bible? That's all they said. That's all they asked. Okay? I said, don't do it. Why? We'll be considered remiss if there's a historical text out there that talks about an airburst, fire and burning stone, not brimstone, fire and burning stone out of the heavens that destroys this whole area, and we're in the right area in the right time frame. If we don't mention that, they're going to say we're not very good researchers. We didn't do the historical side, we only did the science side. So I said, don't do it. Please don't do it. Why? Because if you do it, I said, you just publish the science. Let me handle the other side. I'll mention the science. I'll put 2 and 2 together. Just don't do it yourself, because I just promise you there will be problems. Well, guess what they didn't want to do? They didn't want to leave it out. They put it in there. They asked the question, could this be the event that gave rise to the story of Sodom in the Bible? Okay, but I will say, in fairness to them, this still is, the most accessed scientific paper in the history of scientific papers.
What? I didn't know that.
In the first year, it went to 750 downloads. 750,000 downloads. Usually papers get like 750, right? Or 75. 750,000. It's shooting toward 1 million already. And we got really, really great response all over the world, except for a handful, even less than a handful of scientists and it's not just this thing. The scientists who pushed back on it, pushed back on everything this other group publishes. They get vitriolic, They go ad hominem on you. They really get nasty. Because, and let me tell you, the number one propagator of this vitriol, whom I knew already as one of the world's leading experts on airburst events. I knew this. In 2007, when we took that thing down to Dr. Burley at New Mexico Tech and had that analysis done, at the same month, I contacted this individual because he worked at Sandia National Laboratories right there in Albuquerque where we live. I contacted him. And I said, we may have some kind of an airburst event here. You're one of the leading experts on that. I would like you to come and take samples and do the analysis. Would you do it? He said, let me think about it. He emailed me back later and he turned me down flat. And I know why he turned me down flat. Because it doesn't take too much investigation to find out that I take the Bible seriously. And he didn't want any part of that. I think that's the reason. But anyway, so now look at this. He turned down the opportunity to be the lead scientist on this investigation. And now he's the biggest pushback opponent of that paper. And I emailed him and I said, you know what? This sounds like jealousy to me. You had the opportunity. You haven't published a scientific paper of worth in 20 years. These young guys, these new guys are taking over, and you can't stand it.
Wow. I think we're out of time. We have to go to our sponsor. Texaco is sponsoring this hour. Is there anything that we have left out as we close here? Because this is, there's so much. We could go on for hours. It's so fascinating to me. It's so extraordinary to me. And the weirdest part of all is that you're from New Mexico. The idea that people familiar with Trinitite, it's just hilarious. It's hilarious.
And by the way, the piece of that first piece we found, actually, recently, Japanese national television, NHK, is doing a big documentary, and they actually took that piece and took it down to the Trinity site. So it actually went full circle all the way down to the Trinity site to meet.
Is that the piece that you let me hold?
Yeah.
That's the piece you let me hold, and I have a picture on my phone right here. I got to hold this piece in my hand, and it's just, I shouldn't say this, but I chipped some off and took it home because I just feel. No, it is so, the whole story is so amazing, and we've just hit the highlights. But if ever anybody, wondered, whether the Bible might be history, the idea that something that happens in the first couple of chapters of Genesis, because most people, I think, would say, well, if it happened, we're certainly not going to be able to find it through archaeology. That's just crazy. It's crazy.
Here's how I would wrap it up. I would say, and because we've been talking about explosions, and that's the neat stuff, right? Oh, how bad was the destruction? But the archaeology is still very powerful. We now know Tal Hammam is the largest continuously occupied Bronze Age city north and east of the Dead Sea. In fact, the largest continuously occupied Bronze Age city in the entire southern Levant. There was a period of over 500 years when Tal Hammam was the only city or city-state operating in the southern Levant. Now, here's what I'm saying. Remember that blank map we had? Nobody put anything on this map. The Bible, the geographies that are written of this area is blank. And here's what I say. If the archaeologists and the cartographers, historians, had paid attention to the Sodom narratives, they would have discovered and taken the Sodom narrative seriously. They would have discovered this wonderful civilization a long time ago. Because it's the biggest one. I say, if you try to study the southern Levant without Tal el-Hammam, it's like trying to study Texas without Dallas and Fort Worth, France without Paris. It is the biggest most important city in the southern Levant for most of the Bronze Age. So if they'd paid attention to the Bible, they would have found it a long time ago. But they didn't pay attention to the biblical text, and they didn't even go looking, and they never found it. We paid attention to the biblical text. We went to that area. We did our due diligence and research on the ground, and now in the ground over 16 years. And the end result was we found it. We found it, and now the world knows about that great civilization.
I just want to say, because we do have to close, but we didn't mention this, but talk just for 60 seconds about the gate of Sodom. I mean, this is a mind-blowing archaeological discovery. We haven't even touched on it. Just give us a moment, because I hope people will read the book.
The Bible says in Genesis 19 that Lot sat in the gateway of Sodom. When the Bible mentions something specific, like a piece of architecture, I mean, that's something you, as an archaeologist, you key on, and that's kind of becomes part of your wish list. Oh, I really hope we find that. I want to find that gate because it's actually mentioned in the Bible. Well, we worked on our the lower city, field LA we call it, and we kept working, doing trench after trench after trench, working from west to east. Actually, we worked both directions. But we're moving to the east. New trench every year, 6 more meters. Here we go. And for 6 years, we had this area where we were eating our lunch. That's where we always set up. And so for 6 years, we were eating our lunch. But finally, the trenches went right and gobbled up our lunch area. And what did we discover underneath our lunch area? The gate to the city. The gateway to the city. In fact, Carol, wave your hand again. Carol was the supervisor of the excavation of the gate area. And I've never heard an archaeologist shriek and scream like Carol did, not because we discovered the gate, because we had some of our Jordanian team over there, and one of the members was kind of known as the bulldozer, and he could really move dirt, and he's moving stuff, and they're excavating, and Carol's running around, no, don't touch it, don't touch that stone, and leave it. And drove her crazy. But what did we discover? Oh, the first discovery of a pillared entry hall to a city. A gateway, yes, but not the standard classic gateway you usually get. It's a palatial columned hallway that goes into the city. And our architect, Dr. Lane Rittmeyer, connected that to the Minoan civilization, so it has a unique perspective.
To discover not just, biblical Sodom and biblical Gomorrah, but to discover the gate of the city where Lot sat, I would say you could retire now. I think it is so amazing to me. We really are out of time. I want to exhort you folks. There are limited books back there. We will sit here if you want us to sign them. If you can't get one back there, you can go to SocratesInTheCity.com and you can get books at SocratesInTheCity.com. In fact, you should go to SocratesInTheCity.com because there are so many fascinating conversations, sort of like this one, at SocratesInTheCity.com. Dr. Collins, I cannot begin to thank you enough. So let me simply say thank you. Thank you to all of you for coming. It's just a joy that we get to do this. Thank you, and thank you. God bless you.
Thank you.